Hello and welcome to Gothic Live. I'm Michelle Paver, and over the next hour, I'd like you to join me in exploring the dark, haunted, irrational world of the Gothic. It's a world I've loved since I was a child, and that's probably what led me to try to evoke that world in my latest adult novel, WAKENHYRST. And here to help me in my exploration, I've got two fellow writers of the Gothic, Karen Coles, author of The Asylum, and Paul Maunder, author of The Atomics. And we're also joined by Lara Marshall, who's group manager for Hillingdon Libraries. That means she's a librarian, but a very important one. And Lara is herself a great lover and aficionado of all things Gothic. And it was actually her idea to bring us all together. So thank you very much for that, Lara. So two things first, I just want to mention before we kick off. I hope this isn't just going to be a chat between the four of us. It'd be really great if any of you who are watching feel like posting any comments or asking any questions. There are lots of ways of doing that, and I think they're going to be, how you can do that are going to be appearing on screen at some point. Yes, thank you very much. And from time to time, we will break off from our discussions and we'll perhaps answer some of your questions. That would be really great, get a conversation going. But can I just ask you, please, no spoilers if you've read any of the books. That would be cool. Oh, and the other thing is we're giving away two rather splendid sets of all three of our books, WAKENHYRST, The Asylum and The Atomics, signed by us. And one set is available to be won by those of you who are watching live. All you have to do is go to the secret website address that I will be giving you later in the programme and fill in your name and email address. So that's for those of you who are watching live. And don't worry, if you're watching this as a recording, there is another set of all three books to be won. More about that later. So first, let me just introduce my fellow Gothic authors. Oh, and just a little aside, I've been wondering what the collective noun for a group of Gothic authors is. Is that a frisson or a shudder of authors? Perhaps we can have some suggestions from some of those of you who are watching. Anyway, first Gothic author, Karen Coles, is a painter and sculptor living in South Wales. Hello, Karen. And she lives near a town, I love this, which has the remains of not one but three Victorian asylums. Really envious of you, Karen. Karen's had a lifelong love of fairy tales and myth, which led naturally to the Gothic, and also of the natural world. And I think that really comes through in her wonderful marshy evocation of her Welsh asylum in The Asylum. I really love that about the book. You can practically smell the marshes. It's about an Edwardian heroine who's been cooped up in this asylum, and it wasn't fun in Edwardian times, for 5 years. She can't remember why she's there, but she knows it's not good. And the story is really about her discovering what led to her being there through the then rather new technique of hypnosis. It's a rich brew of madness and murder and religious obsession and herbalism and forbidden love. Huge congratulations to you, Karen, on The Asylum.
Thank you.
Lara, really many congratulations. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Lara has suggested, and I'm blaming her for this, you can blame her as well, that a way of getting to know you is for you to tell us three things about yourself, one of which is not true, and then perhaps viewers can try to guess which one isn't true, and we'll reveal that a bit later. So you have been primed, you have been thinking about this, I know, we're not putting you on the spot.
I have.
Go for it, Karen. What are your three things?
Okay. I once worked at a zoo, and one of my tasks was to sit in a room for an hour and sit on the floor with baby chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans, and they would climb all over me. I was asked to do it because somebody had mentioned that I talked to the animals I was dealing with. So
Right, talking to primates, fine.
Yeah. My second one, when I was younger, I used to like to go caving to look for boosts of greater and lesser horseshoe bats.
Wow.
I don't do that now. Um,
Right.
and the third thing, when I was a child, I used to bring creatures home in a sandwich box, newts and sticklebacks, caterpillars, anything I could find really. I'd bring them home and my father would make me take them back to where I found them.
Wow. Gosh. Well, I'm a bit stumped as to which one I think, but I'm not going to reveal. I think I know. Well, I've got an idea, but I'm not going to reveal that. Let's have a think about that, and viewers can have a think about that. And a little bit later, we'll catch up, and then we can see how good a liar you are, Karen. I'm sure I have an idea you're pretty good at deception. You certainly fooled me in the asylum. Now to Paul Maunder, and welcome, Paul. Paul is an author and journalist. He's not new to being published. He's written a non-fiction memoir, but The Atomics is his first novel, and it's set in 1968. And Frank, the protagonist, I won't really call him a hero, but he's a protagonist. Frank and his young wife Gail are, I think it's fair to say, sort of escaping something that quite bad that happened. And Frank takes a job. He's a scientist at the newly built Seaton 1 nuclear power station. And I think it's fair to say that Frank is not exactly a rational scientist. He is obsessed in a fascinating way with radioactivity. And the story really is about the growth of his obsession. And it's a rich, heady mixture of delusion and male violence and of course radioactivity. Many congratulations, Paul. We'll be obviously talking about much more about the atomics later, but have you got your three things ready to share with us?
Yes, I do. I think not quite as exotic as Karen's, but let me. I'll see how I go. So, thing number one is that I play the flute, and I once played in front of the Queen and Prince Philip in Greenwich Park. Thing number two is that I used to be a champion racing cyclist and still wear lycra far too often. And thing number three is, this is probably the most Gothic of the things, is that I have a pair of chickens who live in my garden who exist quite happily with a family of foxes who are currently living under the decking in my garden. And they don't bother each other and they seem quite happy to get on.
That's astonishing.
There
Wow.
you go.
Well, I need to then. Those foxes need to take lessons from the foxes near me because I'm not sure about that. But wow, thank you for sharing that. Disturbing images of lycra flashing through my mind, but we'll move right along. Lara, I know that you've also got three things. So let's perhaps you can share with us your three things.
Yeah, it was tricky considering I came up with it. Okay, so here are the three things. My first one, I've never actually seen any of the Star Wars movies. My second one, my great-great-grandmother was Native American. And my third one, I work in the library. As you know, one of the things we do is story time. And I once did a story time with Peter Andre.
Wow.
Those are my three things.
Well, that's completely stumped me. I think these are you're all very good at deceiving. I don't know. Okay. Well, look, I think I've been putting you all on the spot, I will just put myself on the spot, as it were, about the three things. For the past 22 years, in other words, all my career as a published writer, on my very old-fashioned desktop computer, I have had a plastic bat, and bat has gone with me to every single research trip I've ever done. So there's a little bit of superstition there. Second thing, as a teenager, I once cut off my hair and then dyed the stubble blue to go to a Halloween party. And the third thing, when I was a child, I used to be quite scared at night only of the suit of armour who lived on our landing. It wasn't a grand house, but we did have a suit of armour. And it used to give me nightmares. So there we are. Those are my three things: the bat, the blue hair, and the suit of armour. Which one is false? So we'll let that settle in for people in case they want to think about that. But let's move on now to actually proper Gothic. Let's talk proper Gothic. And although this is not an English literature lecture, well, I couldn't because I've got a degree in biochemistry, not English literature. What do we mean by Gothic? I think it's just worth having just a minute on that. First thing to say, it's got nothing to do with the original Goths, who were a Germanic people who marauded around Europe in the 3rd century, and I don't think they read Gothic literature. Having looked up a few definitions, I think there's a couple of elements which all our books fall into, which is there's a kind of enclosed space. It's a claustrophobic enclosed space. That's usually the setting. It might be like the ancient manor house in WAKENHYRST, Angelton Asylum in Karen's book, The Asylum, the atomic power station in The Atomics. And then you've got a sort of fearful sense of the past poking its head through. And that could be either superstition or folklore or the past of the characters. But it's irrational. It's maybe not human quite, but there's a clash between that and the present. That's my kind of take on what the Gothic is. But I think the question I've got for people is, why do we like it? I mean, I'm assuming we all do like it. Well, Karen, I know, has said she likes it. So, Karen, why don't you kick off? Do you have any sense of why? What's the appeal for you of the Gothic? Why are you drawn to it?
I think it's sort of enjoyably scary. It's far enough removed from real life to be a break from real life. It's sort of, I like things that are slightly unnerving, things that don't feel quite right. And also there's usually some kind of element that isn't just your everyday, normal daily life, which, I suppose I like that strangeness about it, the sense of isolation nearly always. I like that as well. I think it's enjoyably scary.
Yes, enjoyably scary. Paul, what do you think? I mean, do you like the Gothic? Do you read it and do you enjoy it?
Yes, absolutely. I think for me, it's as much about the ambiguity and the sort of trying to read between the lines. I think it's not pure horror; is quite visceral and quite gory and scary, but perhaps less interesting in that way. Whereas the Gothic there's always a bit of room for interpretation, and you're not quite sure whether to be scared or not. So that sort of plays into our fears a lot more. And I think, but coming back to what Karen was saying, I think I was thinking about the pandemic and how during the pandemic, a lot of people have been going back to old stories that they've liked throughout their lives, and quite sort of traditional story types, because during the pandemic, the fear has been quite unnerving that it's of something completely unknown and quite new. Whereas in the Gothic, we have this kind of story structure which we know and love, and we know we're going to come out of it the other side, even with a bad dream.
Yeah. Lara, what do you reckon on that? I mean, is there a particular thing that do you like being frightened, and do you find that that's what readers come in and they say, oh, what's something scary? Is that what they ask?
I do personally really enjoy that escapism, you know, and that unsettling feeling, like I think yourself and Karen and Paul both described. I did look up an official definition in preparation for tonight, and didn't know about the Goths until then, which is quite interesting.
There we go. Yes.
And also that Gothic architecture was only given that definition because it was non-classical. So sort of going into that, it's almost as if Gothic is something that is just not normal. You know, it's not average. And I think when people come in the library, they want escapism. They want a book that's just going to take them out and something that's not their average everyday read. It's just a shame we don't have a separate genre for Gothic in the library. I think Gothic books probably go in with fiction or possibly science fiction fantasy, depending on the book.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I have to say with me, you know, I'm sometimes asked, you know, what's the appeal? I agree. I think it is, you know, about exploring your fears and perhaps your obsessions, but in a safe way, because, you know, you're not actually haunted. We'll come to sort of favourites later on, I think. The setting, though, is really important in Gothic. And I think the reason is, I mean, I went to a lot of trouble to make the fens in WAKENHYRST real and the old manor house real. And the idea is that, you know, you're trying to make it real so that the reader will then believe in the thing crawling out of the fen or whatever, the irrational. I wondered, Karen, you had a sort of family connection with an asylum, didn't you? Is that what gave you the idea for the asylum?
That was, yes, really. We were doing family history research and discovered that one of my ancestors died in Peckham House Lunatic Asylum. And I couldn't find out much about her, but of course my mind was making up stories. What if this happened? What if that happened? And that was really what started off the whole thing. As well as sort of, there was a church down the road where a murder took place on a marsh behind the church, and that seemed like such a brilliant setting with the marsh behind the church. Just,
Yes. So that all came together. Gosh, and Paul, am I right that you weren't originally setting out to write something Gothic when you sort of tackled the idea of radioactivity? Is that right?
Well, yes. So it was kind of coming together of a couple of ideas. I mean, the original inspiration was when my son was quite small a few years ago. He used to watch a lot of superhero movies. So he'd get up ridiculously early and drag me downstairs. And while he sat watching the latest Avengers movie and I sort of tried to wake up, we'd watch these movies about often anti-heroes who get infected with radiation and become a kind of a hero. And I just felt like I wanted to subvert that genre, that story. But at the same time, I quite like the sort of niche called folk horror. So things like The Wicker Man and The Incredible Hulk. So things like, The Wicker Man and The Shining and M.R. James and some of these horror stories, some of which are more or less overt, and try to put them together, I suppose. And the idea of a man going to a remote place and slowly unravelling, or quite quickly unravelling, combined with the radiation.
Yes, which certainly is one sort of rather queasy feeling all the way through the book. You know, thinking don't go near it. You know, but he actually is fascinated by it, and you can sort of understand the pull. But on the other hand, I mean, it's funny how stories do come. With WAKENHYRST, I found it didn't all come at once, you know, but I knew I wanted a sort of fenland setting. But then 3 things happened in the space of about 3 weeks. You know, I walked into Oxfam and found a weird book, a battered old penguin classic about the book of Marjorie Kemp. It was this strange 14th century woman mystic who had 14 children and then went off sex, understandably, with her husband. After 14 children. And then there was, an exhibition of the Victorian painter and axe murderer, Richard Dadd, who ended up in Broadmoor painting these incredibly strange paintings. And then I read about something called the Wenhaston Doom. I've christened it the WAKENHYRST Doom in the book, which was this painting of devils dragging sinners into hell, which had been whitewashed by the Puritans and then was chucked out by the Victorians into the churchyard and would have been burnt, gone up in flames if it hadn't rained and someone just saw a bit of a face, sort of washed through the whitewash. So all those things came together. And that, I don't know, do people find that bits and pieces come together and then you gradually think, oh yeah, I can use that. And then it's like iron filings around a magnet. It doesn't all come at the same time. Did you find that? You're nodding, Karen?
Yeah. Different bits, but things came together eventually. But they were different. I thought they were different stories, and I was thinking I could do this and I could do that, and then all of a sudden, several things came together. And I thought, oh, that's the story.
Yeah. It's quite strange how that happened.
Can I ask a question just about the time in the settings? Because I thought that was quite interesting, because both Michelle, your novel, and Karen, your novel, they both open in 1906, which I thought was an incredible coincidence. Which is amazing. And then Paul, your novel was set in the 60s. Yeah, and I just thought it was quite interesting. We have this sort of Edwardian, sort of brooding, very dark, stormy sort of situation in, Michelle and Karen's novels. And then, of course, the 60s, which, of course, was like the Cold War and had this whole, like, nuclear threat sort of surround that. And why you went for those specific time periods.
Yeah, well, just to jump in on that, as you say, for me it was very much about the Cold War and that impending threat and sort of sense of dread, but also it had to be kind of around then because in the 60s nuclear energy was quite new and very much in its evolution. So whilst everyone understood the dangers, it was still perceived as quite a new shiny technology. And no major disasters had happened. But I also quite like the juxtaposition between perhaps how we now perceive the 60s as very sort of shiny and pop music and quite sort of liberating, with the darker reality of the story.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, I obviously can't speak for Karen. She would have had different reasons for choosing 1906. For me, I wanted the father. There's two main characters. There's the father, Edmund, based on Richard Dadd, but different. And I wanted him to be a sort of Victorian almost in his mindset. I mean, even though it's Edwardian times, he's Victorian in his mindset. He's very religious. And then Maud, I wanted her to live into old age and be more in the modern era in the 60s. So I had to sort of work it all out very carefully. I kept getting it wrong. I'm not very good at maths and doing timelines and everything like that. And so I fixed on 1906. And also I wanted her at the climax of the story. She's a teenager, but I didn't want the First World War. I just didn't, I didn't want it to get in the way, frankly. So it all had to be worked out just before then. So it was all cunningly planned to fit. So that's how I worked it out. But very forensic. What about you, Karen?
Well, I didn't initially want it to be around 1850. But I had Harry in my mind so clearly that I could see him. And he smoked, and he wouldn't have smoked in 1850. But if that wouldn't have actually, I probably would have just done away with that, even though I could see him. But it was that when I was doing the research at the Glamorgan Archives, it was the years 1901 to 1906 that had the most information, had photographs, letters. And so I really got more of an insight into patients at that time. And I thought it fitted. It just seemed to into place. Yeah.
Yes, I'm really glad you asked that question, Lara, because it's a and then once you settle on the time and you really know it, that then it works and everything else feeds in. But it's quite difficult, working out. I think. I think we'll take a break there, and I'll just chime in because I don't want to forget these giveaways. So everybody can be thinking about questions. But as I mentioned, there is one giveaway of a set of three signed books, the Asylum, the Atomics and WAKENHYRST, if you're watching live. And all you've got to do is go to the secret website address, which I will shortly be announcing, and fill in your name and email address, and then we'll pick one. And the secret website address is michellepaver.com/gothiclive. So there you are, you can see it underneath, michellepaver.com/gothiclive. Go to that, fill in your name and email address, and then we'll choose one, or rather my producer and agent, Peter, will choose one. So that's if you're watching live. If you're watching this as a recording afterwards, do not despair, because you've got a chance of also winning another set of those three signed books. And what you've got to do over the next 6 days after we finish recording is send an email with your name and address to gothiclive@michellepaver.tv. There we are. And I said it right, gothiclive@michellepaver.tv before Thursday. So there we go. Now, I think before we go into questions, shall we catch up with those false things? If I say false things, I mean, when I asked all of us to name three things, I haven't got very far with sorting out in my own mind who was lying about what, but I can have a guess anyway. Have we had any guesses, Peter, from anyone in the audience, or are they all waiting for us to get it wrong? They're all waiting for us to get it wrong. Okay, I'm going to pitch in. Karen, I would be very envious if you had gone down caves and found roosts of horseshoe bats. So I don't think it's that one.
No.
Oh, well, there you go. Because I really would have been so envious. So well done.
The chimpanzees.
No, that was true.
That's amazing that you sat around talking to gorillas. That's absolutely fantastic. Does anyone else? Lara, do you want to guess what Paul was lying about?
Oh. That's really tricky. Paul, can you remind me again? Because I've forgotten them all. Well, not all, but I've forgotten the last one.
Okay, so the first one was playing flute for the Queen. The second one was cycling, the racing cyclist. And third one was the chickens and the foxes.
That's right. I think it's the chicken and foxes.
That's what I thought, yeah.
I'm afraid not. No, it's the playing flute. I don't have a musical bone in my body.
You never played the flute. Okay.
I've never seen the
We
Queen.
will revise. I'm amazed at those chickens. There's something, you must have very frightened chickens.
Yeah, well, one's called Pirate, one's called Sooty, and they're quite attitude South London chickens. They don't take any prisoners.
There must be. Lara, do you have Native American ancestry? I think. Wow. Can I ask which First Nation or tribe? Do we know?
Apache.
Oh, wow. That's so
on my
cool.
mother's side. Yeah.
Right. So what were you lying about?
I am obsessed with Star Wars.
Okay. Right. Okay. So Okay, yes. I actually thought it was quite amusing that you so sort of confessing that you've never been watched Star Wars, because some of my generation thinks, yeah, so what? You haven't watched Star Wars? There we go. Does anyone want to guess mine? It was the bat, or the blue hair for the Halloween party, or the suit of armour.
I think the blue hair was not true.
I'm going to go with the suit of armour.
Okay.
I think the bat.
Actually, you'll go with the bat. How could you doubt the bat? Here is the bat. This is the very bat who travels with me everywhere. He's called Bat. So, there we go. And the suit of armour is true. Not grand at all. My parents bought him in a flea market when they got married, and he was called Uncle Alphonse, and he did give me nightmares. So yes, Karen picked it. The blue hair. Actually, it was simply that I've never went to parties. I was a complete introvert, never went to parties, so no way was I. I'm definitely not the blue hair. So well spotted, everybody.
Intimately now.
There we go. I don't know, Peter, have we got any questions coming in, or is everybody just sitting there wondering what on earth is going on? We've got some questions. Should we have a few live questions coming in? Okay. How do you decide how scary or dark you make the book for the reader before? Do you, or while you were writing the book? How scary or dark you make for the book for the reader? Paul, I mean, did you aim to frighten? And did you plan that beforehand? The extent to which you wanted to frighten? Was that your aim? Oh, Paul's looking a bit concerned. He may have had sound issues. Karen, can I ask you that question? Did you set out to frighten?
I can't hear anything. Is that?
We've got a sound problem. Okay, well, I'm going to answer that question.
Yeah, sorry.
I know we've got it back.
Hear anything.
Okay. Can you hear now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah.
It all went silent.
Oh dear. Oh, do you want to have a tackle? Did you aim to make the book frightening, and how hard did you want to go?
No, I just started writing, really. I knew what was going to happen in the story, and it just developed as I was writing. I didn't know all the things that would happen all the way through, but I didn't decide on making it particularly dark. It just seemed to get darker as I went along.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I have to say that right from the start, my aim was to entertain and frighten, and I had a very clear aim that I did want to frighten. I find it incredibly difficult. It's a great question, Callum. I find it incredibly difficult to make things frightening. I never quite know if I'm succeeding or not. And there's lots and lots of rewriting, and it's not a question of pulling back because this is too frightening. No, I just try to make it as frightening as I possibly can, and hope something will stick. Paul, I think emotion is really important in Gothic, and feelings. Was fear what you wanted to evoke in the Atomics?
Yes, but I think in an early draft, it was more tending towards the visceral horror side, to the point where there was a monster kind of staggering out of the sea and haunting the characters. But actually, then when a friend read the manuscript, she wrote back saying, "Was that thing supposed to be scary? Because it was just funny, really." In subsequent drafts, I pulled back on the horror and maybe dialed up the compassion a bit, and hopefully that sort of balance makes it even more unnerving. Because actually, if there's some genuine love and affection and possible warmth between characters, but that turns into fear, it maybe is more impactful.
Well, I certainly found it so, and I thought it was what it evoked in me when I was reading it was a sort of queasy sense of, oh God, what's going to happen next? What's he going to do? I hope, if you pull back, it's more effective than if you've got, slashing and all the rest of it. We've got a question here. While writing your books, do they ever scare you yourself? That's an interesting one. Karen, did you get scared at certain points? You said you were sort of letting the story develop. Yeah.
Yes, I definitely scared myself and made myself cry. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I have to say, I didn't so much. I found myself with this, as with my ghost stories, Dark Matter and Thinner, I find myself flipping between two forms. On the one hand, I'm much more analytical with these sort of stories than I am with others. I'm sort of thinking now, where is the scary bit going to come, and how am I going to build up to it, and all this. It's very much subjective. I am the controlling author, and then I'll flip into the sort of subconscious, like, ooh, something's just crawled out of the fen. I didn't expect that. I wouldn't plan that, but that's quite fun. I'm going to go with that. So I kept flipping between the two. I had some funny dreams, I have to say, at times, but I don't often get actually scared when I'm writing. So perhaps I should. I don't know. And another one. Any advice for a young person trying to get into writing? Okay, Paul. We were talking, I think, off air. It's taken us both a while to get published. So have you got any advice for getting into writing?
Well, yeah. So I started writing when I was about 22 or so, just after university. I wrote 4 novels, and which weren't published, and then wrote a couple of non-fiction books which were published, and then this my debut novel. I guess the main advice there is just keep going, and like anything, it's a craft. You have to learn it, and that takes different people different periods of time. I suppose if I have another piece of advice, it would always be to think about the reader. I think where I went wrong in those early books is that it was about my own personal obsessions and interests, but I didn't necessarily think about how that would land with a broad readership. So always have the reader in your mind.
Yeah, Karen, have you got any useful nuggets to give to a young writer?
I would say to write what you really love and what you really want to read yourself. So the story that you really want to read. I think, yes, think about people reading it, but not sort of try to guess what people will like, because you can't, I don't think. So to really put everything that you love into that book, I would say.
I think that's really true, because sometimes I used to read a lot of how to write books, and they're quite useful. That certainly taught me a lot about point of view and stuff like that. But sometimes you get this advice: write about what you know, and that never seemed to make much sense to me, because when like Paul, actually, I started when I was about 22, supposed to be studying biochemistry, and I didn't know much. So. But write about what you love. I totally agree with you, Karen. What really grabs you. At that time I was writing about a boy and a wolf, and that, a few years later, ended up being Wolf Brother, my Stone Age series. So that's something else. A little bit of advice: keep whatever you write, because you might end up years down the line being used. Yeah. I've got a few other little tips. One practical one, it's just a suggestion, but carry a notebook with you, and keep one by your bed and perhaps one by the TV, because it's when you're sort of relaxed or maybe falling asleep, you might get ideas. It might be for a story or for a bit of dialogue or an episode. If you don't write it down, you'll probably forget it. Take it from me. But it's really handy. And then, just sling them in a drawer. But sometimes you just look at these things and you think, oh, yeah, that's not bad, So keep a notebook with you. Something else I would suggest is switch your phone off. and try to disable your email or whatever if you have it on your computer. I mean, my computer is 23 years old. It's never even heard of the internet, but the internet and social media is the enemy of concentration, and you need concentration to be able to write. So you can get apps these days that can sort of freeze the internet for however long you like, and it just gives you some peace and quiet to concentrate. But as Paul says, it's what is it? The saying is, good writing is 1 part inspiration and 9 parts perspiration. You just got to keep going, and that's it. We have a winner apparently for our giveaway, our live giveaway. Are we going to see that on? We're going to be told. Oh, okay. I'm not going to pronounce that. Neve MC Enif. Is that the winner? I hope I pronounced that right. Congratulations. And
congratulations.
If you can email us
They're
your
brilliant.
postal address,
I can say
we'll
that
be able to send
because
the books out,
I didn't write any of them.
this evening. Excellent. Well done. Well done. Congratulations. Yeah. So we've been talking. That's really interesting. We've had some questions about. We've had some questions about how to write, and actually, I was going to come on to that because we've talked about making the setting is so important for Gothic, isn't it? I think we've all got quite different settings, and it's important to make it real so that the reader feels that the story is real and they're immersed in it. How does one go about making it real? Do we do research, or do we just make it up as we go along? And does the research give you ideas, take you in a different direction? Karen, did you find how did you do your research? Did you go round an asylum?
I did. I first of all, I researched online. And then once I decided which asylum I was going to base it on, I rang. It's now a psychiatric hospital, which is all brand new, but some of the asylum buildings are still there. So I rang up and asked if I could have a look at the building, and they took me on a tour around it, which was wonderful.
What, just you?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So what, could you stop and sort of take notes and things?
I could. There isn't a lot of it left, but all the grounds are just as they were. And it was just wonderful. And also the archives, going to the archives, and I could look at the actual patient note folders and the letters and photographs.
Gosh.
It was just amazing.
Lara, it's occurred to me that do you get wannabe authors or other authors coming in and saying, "Oh, I'm doing some research, I need your help," or something? Have you ever had that? Because you'd be brilliantly, positioned to help, wouldn't you?
So, I mean, right now I feel like I want to write a book. Being here, it's amazing and inspirational. It really is. But we get a lot of people that come in. They get the books on how to, Stephen King's on writing. I think Maeve Binchy wrote. The writers.
Stephen King's is very good, actually. Yeah.
I think that's a super, super famous one, isn't it?
It is really good.
The Writers and Artists Yearbook.
Yes.
We usually have a reference copy of that. And we do have a few creative writing groups because, I mean, essentially what libraries are has sort of evolved over time. And at the moment, what we want to be, rather than just providing books, I mean, not saying that isn't enough, because that is amazing, is providing a space for people to be themselves and to be creatively aware as well. So we do get lots of people that really like to be writers. We love to do author events like this one, which is really inspirational, really helps people. Specific writing workshops, and just general embracing culture and creativity, which I think sort of spirals people into writing as well.
Very much, very much. I think. I mean, I've been going to my local library, Wimbledon Library, since I was 8. So
Yay.
that's 52 years. It's a long time.
Wow.
And just the idea of it's being free, and I could just go in, because we couldn't afford to buy lots of books. I just come out with an armful of books every week. And it's an amazing place. So it's lovely. Do children sort of sign up for those creative writing classes, or can they? I mean,
Yeah. So over the summer, we have like a summer reading challenge. And during that time, we really try and focus, like when kids are on holiday, try and focus them into doing something nice and creative in with what the Reading Agency, which is the national reading charity, what they set as our theme. So it's just try and encourage it to everybody, I think, and also having new authors, I think, is really important because it just helps the process not seem so scary. I mean, like Michelle, like you're so amazing and so established. You see like the whole Wolf Brother series, and then your ghost stories at WAKENHYRST, and then you have these wonderful new exciting upcoming authors like Karen and Paul, and it just helps give a really broad scope and a broad range. So yes.
Excellent. Oh, that's very inspiring. And Paul, I mean, you took a while to get published, as did I. I took 16 years. I think you took a little bit, but in fiction at least. But how on earth do you go about researching, or do you go about researching an atomic power station? How did you do it? Because he was a very convincing scientist. So.
Yeah, well, I went to one. That was much like Karen.
Okay.
And so I looked online, and Sizewell B in Suffolk, near Aldborough, they do tours. If you want to go along, now you can sign up, and a tour guide will take you around. So I went up there one summer's weekend and stayed overnight, and then did a tour. I think there were 6 of us. The other 5 were all very much into the engineering and the technical aspects. So we did the tour, and they were all asking engineering kind of questions. Then I was asking things like, "Oh, have you seen any ghosts?" And has anyone disappeared here? And has anyone jumped off that big tower? And to be fair, the tour guide took it all in his stride. I think he'd had far weirder people than I come along, but it was useful just in the sense of the scale of it and the emptiness. There's not actually that many people around, and there were quite a lot of wildlife. So we saw sort of birds of prey overhead, and squirrels and just small animals which you don't necessarily think would be living that space. So fascinating. But to be fair, with the rest of the story, I pretty much made the rest of it up. So they do say, another writing tip is that do your research and then try to forget it all. Because if you do your research and have it there in front of you, you'll just regurgitate it and it'll feel really stodgy on the page and obvious.
I mean, it is one of the really difficult things about research, because I like to do lots of research, because one of the reasons I do lots of research is that I never know what the research is going to give me, not just in terms of making it accurate, but I'm going to get ideas for whole bits of the story from research. I mean, in WAKENHYRST, I was doing some research into life in the fens, and there was something called eel babbing, which I'd never heard of, being a townie. What the hell is eel babbing? Well, it's a way of catching eels by using a whole lot of sort of slimy worms tied to some string. Anyway, it's great. But that gave me a whole idea for actually quite a romantic bit in the story, all about eel babbing. That's why I do the research. But Paul's absolutely right that if you put too much in, and I find this very much with the Stone Age books I write, you don't want to put it all in. You've got to just keep maybe a tiny percentage of the research. Karen, did you find any of your research sort of spun your story in a different direction, or gave you something that unexpected?
I could Well, I found I couldn't get my main character. And it was actually the research and reading the letters. And I thought, oh, that's her. That's her. And then she came to life from the letters. So
Wow.
even though it was only a few sentences, and yet it gave me a voice, and, you know, so it was really useful for that.
Yeah. And that's possibly not something that you'd expected.
No, not at all.
Yeah. That's why I like doing research. I mean, conversely, I remember doing an event with another author who shall be nameless, who said, "Well, I don't understand why you do all this research. You know, if I have a question I want answered, I just phone up an expert and get the answer to that specific question." Okay, well, that's certainly another way of doing it. You know, it just shows we all do things differently. But I wouldn't know what question to ask, because all my lovely messy research is what's giving me the story gradually. I mean, it's a long way around, I suppose. But I was reading somewhere that, you know, not everybody did their research. I mean, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and this apparently is true, when he wrote the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, his only experience of being on water had been a ride on the Chepstow ferry. Can you believe it? You know, yeah. And one of the greatest evocations of being, you know, becalmed on the sea, you know, as idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean. Yeah, all in his imagination.
I feel cheated.
Well, no, it's his imagination helped by certain substances and things, but, you know, laudanum or whatever. But I think it's amazing. But that sort of leads me on, I suppose, to, you know, I think we're all pretty enthused about Gothic. I think it's fair to say we all like our ghost stories and our Gothic. And maybe some people watching are wondering what are our favourite, or some of our favourite stories and or films. So I wonder, Lara, have you got any particular favourite authors of ghost stories and or films that, you know, not Star Wars, thank you.
No, that's fine. No. Damn it, that was my go-to. So I love it when someone comes in the library and says, "Oh, you know, I really want a new book. I want to try a new genre, something a little bit scary, a little bit eerie." This is brilliant. And my go-to book for ages was The Monk by Matthew Lewis, right?
Oh, yes.
Which seems like a mad book to recommend. Mad.
It's wonderful, wonderful.
It's just wonderful, isn't it? It's just, and it's so creepy. And like bordering on horror, but not horror. You know, it's just, it's this whole world in of itself. So if you haven't read The Monk, please do. And I must admit, you know, I do like that sort of like older setting of horror, or not horror, sorry, gothic fiction.
Well, it really is Gothic, isn't it?
Exactly. So that would be my pick.
Oh yes, nice one, excellent. Paul, what about you?
Okay, well, mine is a bit more up to date, a bit more modern, and set in LA, and it's by Bret Easton Ellis. So he, a famous wild child of the 80s, and obviously well known for American Psycho, which we all know is not notoriety. This one is called Luna Park, which is a bit later, not possibly so well known. No, not. You know, it's probably a bit quieter. It's basically a fake memoir. So the main character is Bret Easton Ellis, the author, who is haunted by his own characters from previous books, particularly Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. So Gothic with a hint of humour, dark humour in there. And what I also like is that he's got this amazing, beautiful house in LA, but it's slowly falling apart around him, which of course is a metaphor for his whole existence. So recommended.
Nice.
Sounds great. I'm going to order it.
Actually, I don't know that one. We've got The Haunting of Hill House up on screen. Is that also recommended by Paul, or is that recommended? Yes.
That was one of mine as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
perhaps
definitely.
slightly more traditional Gothic, but some people, including Stephen King, I think it's the best ghost story ever written. Classic haunted house story, and coming back to the ambiguity sort of theme, it's never really clear what's going on. How much is in her head, how much is real haunting, how much is supernatural. And quite a devastating ending too.
Yes, it would certainly be on my list. And they made actually a really good film in the 60s. The Haunting, I think it's just called The Haunting. Robert Wise directed it, and it was a really good adaptation, I thought. But I mean, the book is I think is magnificent, and certainly anyone and everyone should read it. She's an amazing heroine, I think. Karen, what have you got for us?
Pick one.
I know, it's really hard, isn't it? Well, I mean, you can pick 2 or 3 if you like. It doesn't,
Well, in part, it would be Great Expectations, because the part where Pip is in the churchyard, in the graveyard, and Magwitch appears, this scary convict, and with the prison Hulk out on the estuary, and well, it was just a perfect Gothic atmosphere. And also Miss Havisham, she's still got her wedding feast out, all covered in cobwebs. That's an enduring image that I really love. And more modern one, The Wasp Factory is I love the isolation there. And that's and it's funny as well as being
yes, that's true. Yes. Gosh. Well, I've gone for. I mean, I agree with all of those. So I'm glad that you've all mentioned them. I mean, I've gone for collections of short stories. I'm a fan of Algernon Blackwood, who is someone who you may come across in. He's anthologized quite often. He's got a wonderful face. And I wish they'd show. Apparently he did television, early television in the late 40s and 50s, of reading some of his stories. He wrote fantasy and things, which some of that's showing up that isn't my favourite. But he wrote a story called The Kit Bag, which is extremely scary, and The Empty House, which is just a classic. 2 people go to a house which is supposed to be haunted, and they get scared, and it's really frightening. And that's hard to do, because there are no surprises. It's just really scary. So he's a really good writer. I recommend him. E. Nesbit, of course, we know her children's books, but she wrote some brilliant ghost stories. One of her best is called Man Size in Marble, and it's about effigies, and it's very scary. So I do recommend those. And she wrote some other ones as well. But there we are, Man Size in Marble. And in terms of film, my 2 particular favourites, The Innocents is, I think it's 1960s remake, adaptation, classic adaptation by Jack Clayton of The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, and it is brilliant. Don't ever watch the colorized version. It was made in black and white for a reason. It's amazing, and the sight of the ghostly governess on the other side of the river, or of the marsh, is just, that's what a ghost looks like. And then completely different, but also very Gothic, is Nosferatu, Der Untold. This is Werner Herzog. I like the German version with subtitles, to be a purist. It's just so beautiful. It's Gothic and very, very beautiful. And I watch it every few years, and I absolutely love it. So we've got 2 more questions to end with, and then we'll have to wrap up, I think. But are these live questions that we're coming through? Or are you, yes, should all novels be researched? Well, I don't think necessarily. What do you think? We'll have to be quick here, but what do you think, Karen?
I don't think all novels need to be researched. I think it depends what the novel's about, really.
Yeah, I agree. What do you reckon? Yeah? That's a yes from Paul.
Agreed,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
you know, I mean, Martin Cruz Smith, who wrote Gorky Park, which is set in Moscow, wonderful, wonderful detective story set in Moscow. He'd never been to Moscow. And I had, when I read that, and I thought, wow, he really knows Moscow, and he hadn't. So there we go. Is there one final question from that we've got time for? Do you ever struggle to finish a story? I certainly do. Having said that, I finished one yesterday. I finished the ninth and final version book of the Torek Stone Age books, and I struggle with every single one. Does anyone else? What about you, Karen?
Oh yes, yeah. I've never worked so hard on anything in my life as that book.
Yeah. And Paul, you look like you're nodding as well.
Well, yes, but although I struggle to start a story, it's the first page is the hardest, and then once you're in, it's less painful. Still painful, but less. So
I agree with you. I think the ending, the beginning is even worse. I think the whole thing is really hard, actually. But it does. You're right. It gets easier. So there's loads more we could say, but I'm afraid we've run out of time. So I just want to say a big thank you, firstly to Karen and Paul for agreeing to come on and be grilled about your three things and all the rest of it. Good luck with the asylum and with the atomics, and I hope our paths cross again. Thank you to my agent Peter Cox for actually running the show and providing all these lovely graphics as well as fielding all the live chat. They really, it does look gorgeous. A big thank you to Lara for such huge enthusiasm. It shines through, and I have to say it's really encouraging to us writers. But also thank you, Lara, for having the idea of bringing us together. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be doing this. So
thank
well
you for
done
doing
you.
it. It's amazing.
Well, it's been such great fun. And it's lovely to hear what you're doing in the libraries. But most of all, thank you to everyone who's been watching, and thank you for your enthusiasm and such great questions. Keep enjoying the dark side. Goodbye.